Hi, this is Russ Brialt with the Shroud of Turin Education Project. And in 1988, the Shroud was carbon dated by 3 different carbon dating labs. One in Tucson, Arizona, one in Zurich, and one in Oxford, England. And the British Museum served as the kind of the organizer, the overseer of all 3 laboratories, headed up by that time by a man known as Michael Tite. And so these labs did their research, and then they submitted all their research to Michael Tite at the British Museum, who then compiled everything and submitted it to the British journal called Nature. And that's where the results were published the very next year in 1989 in Nature, and where they rendered their verdict that the Shroud had a date range of 1260 to 1390 with a 95% confidence factor. And so I guess that was the end of the story, right? The Shroud is nothing more than some kind of a medieval fake, according to the carbon labs. But then information leaked out, eventually realizing that they didn't cut 3 samples from 3 different locations. They cut 1 sample from the outside corner edge, exactly where it had been held and handled hundreds of times, literally held up physically, at that corner with it's 14 feet long. So if you're going to hold it horizontally on a platform, you're going to have several clerics in a row, probably 5 or 6, each holding on to a section of the cloth, in particularly that exact corner that was cut for carbon dating. In fact, we know that there are over 275 such public exhibitions held in between 1413 and 1694. And so, if you were looking for the worst possible sample location, well, then you'd cut right from where they cut, which is that outside corner edge. But that's not really what I'm talking about here with respect to this article. But it just shows that even in the cutting of the samples, they violated the sampling protocol that was established in 1986, 2 years earlier. And there are many other things that were violated. Having said that, what we realized is that the British Museum did not give to Nature all of the raw data. And so they withheld some of the data. Why did they do that? We asked for all the data to be released to us, to researchers, to analyze and assess for 30 years. Until finally, under the duress of a Freedom of Information Act in 2017, a French researcher by the name of Tristan Casabianca, he was able to obtain access to all of the raw data. Took him 2 years to assess it all, published the results of his work in a peer-reviewed journal known as Archaeometry, which is actually published by Oxford itself. And lo and behold, we find out that there were many dates that were excluded from the final paper. And why were those dates excluded? In other words, you had many outliers that were older, many outliers that were younger, and so it was suggested then that sample that was cut was not homogeneous. In other words, it was not fully representative of the entire Shroud. Why did we have all these different outliers? And the reason all the data was not submitted to Nature to be published was because if they had, they would never have achieved their 95% confidence factor, which every journal paper tries to achieve. And so what did they do? They fudged the data. They withheld data on purposely so they could achieve a 95% confidence factor, which gets right back to this paper. It's almost like cut from the headlines of the news right now. So this fudging of the data is not a new thing. It's been going on for years and years and years, and it even impacted the Shroud of Turin, because now we know that had they published all of the data, they would never have been able to publish their article because it would not have met the statistical reliability factor. In other words, when when you're using multiple laboratories, in this case there were 3 laboratories, there kind of is an unspoken rule that you had to have at least a 60% correlation among all of the laboratories involved. And I think 60% is giving them a broad stroke. I mean, why not 80%? But when they factored in all of the data that was excluded, guess what? The interlaboratory correlation dropped down to 29%. So no wonder they couldn't publish all of the data. It would have never been published. And so once again, this is just another example of how this carbon dating has become such a fiasco. So I think at best, what we can say is that the carbon date that was done in 1988 is inconclusive, really, because we don't even know what they dated, because there's evidence to suggest that it was part of a medieval reweave, that there's the introduction of cotton and other materials in that corner that was cut, yet there's no cotton anywhere else on the shroud. So we don't even know what we dated. But I just wanted to bring up this with this latest article of so much fraud and so much fake science. I mean, we all knew about fake news. I guess we didn't know about fake science, but apparently there's a lot of that going on too, and it even impacted the Shroud of Turin. Thanks for tuning in.